What's the alternative? We can't wait for things to be perfect. We can't wait for the coast to be clear. We can't wait for nothing to be on the horizon. There's always something on the horizon, right? And it's like, you know, similarly, it's like there's people who are like, well, I have a vacation coming up or something coming up. I'm just going to wait or I'm going to pause. But eventually you're going to have to work through that, right? So you might as well do it sooner than later. Otherwise, you're just kicking the can down the road.
All right, listen, we're what, 3 months in, getting there, almost 3 months into the new year. You know, the name of the game with health and fitness, consistency, right? And I'm seeing some chatter. I think you're seeing some chatter, a lot of chatter about people struggling with consistency at this point in time. Now, you've mentioned this critical component to achieving consistency. And I think we should really dive into this today so we can nip this right in the bud, equip people who are tuning in, listening in, watching with this critical component so they can achieve consistency and ultimately capture their health. What do you say?
I love it. Let's do it. Let's dive right in.
All right. Well, give it to us. What is the critical component to consistency?
So the critical component to consistency is, drum roll please, self-compassion.
Hey.
Now, before you roll your eyes or say, yeah, let us plead our case.
Yes.
Because it really is the critical component. So I've been getting a lot of emails saying, Adam, things are great. And there's always a but, you know, yesterday wasn't a great day. The last few days have been tough. So it's always this, you know, I had a indulgent meal the other night. Like there's this expectation of perfection. And I know the antidote to perfectionism is self-compassion.
Okay, I'm with you. Now, I've been tumbling around in my brain some of this, right? So first of all, explain how self-compassion is the antidote to perfectionism. What does that look like in practice?
Well, perfectionism is this, you know, we have this expectation that we're going to do everything quote unquote perfectly. But on some level, we know that's not realistic, right? It's basically a way to, you know, perfectionism is giving ourselves an out, right? We're absolving ourselves of the need to do the work. And at the root of it, it's a form of self-sabotage, right? Because we know we can't stay perfect, however you define perfection or perfect, forever, right? So what's going to happen when you inevitably fall off track? When life inevitably happens, a punch gets thrown at you, whatever metaphor you want to use, something's going to happen, right? So we know being quote unquote perfect is not possible. So the only way forward, realistically and sustainably, is to allow yourself the ability to stick with it while being less than perfect.
Right. There's really no choice, by the way. Like none of us is perfect. And I think rationally and consciously, we all know that. One of my clients said, you know, perfectionism is an impossible bar that was set inside of my head long ago, right? Like there is programming, right? And I think you were the one, Adam, who said perfectionism is a practice in quitting.
Yeah.
That one gets me. That one is like, wait a minute. When I think of perfect, I don't think of quitting. So right there, like, hello.
I know, like the mental gymnastics, like it's so ironic and unexpected that like, because when you think of perfect, you think of someone who has their stuff together, who's sticking with it. But in actuality, it's a person who quits a lot.
It's kind of heartbreaking, right? Something I work with my perfectionist clients on is to embrace imperfection as perfection.
Yeah.
right? You're imperfectly perfect, meaning you're as you are meant to be human, right? And I think a lot of us wrap up our core value as human beings in this ideal, in this perfectionism. Again, something that's often programmed into us early on and that we're left to battle with the rest of our lives. But I think kind of throwing this out on the table and saying, hey, all of us chasing down perfectionisms, oh, we're actually kind of quitters.
Yes.
That, oh,
Yes.
it doesn't feel good.
It doesn't, and I think, self-compassion, which again, I know and believe is the antidote, is the act of taking care of ourselves when we're imperfect. I'll say that again. Self-compassion is the act of taking care of ourselves when we're imperfect. And if the opposite of self-compassion or a cousin of it is being perfect, that means we're only taking care of ourselves when we're perfect. Right? So,
which means never.
Right. Which I think on every perfectionist, and I'm a recovering perfectionist, so I can really, speak here. We all know this to be true on some level, right? Like every perfectionist is like, yes, I get it. But it's still so ingrained in us. So I'd like to talk about some tactics to kind of navigate these feelings, because we know the only way forward is self-compassion, is to stick with it while being less than perfect.
Yes. Okay. So the first tactic, what you've lovingly designated as exposure therapy, what I've lovingly called intentionally half-assing it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, pick something, y'all. Pick something you think you got to do perfectly, and then I want you to decide what less than perfect looks like and go for it. Sounds crazy, but like,
no, it's so
I'll
good.
give you
It's so good.
I'll give you an example. I'm, and I know you're like this, Adam, right? Super clean, perfect, pristine kitchen at the end of the night, no matter what. No matter if it means you staying up late, scrubbing all the pots and pans, like, no matter, that's me, right? So something I am currently actively working on is leaving some things in the sink and going to bed. It feels really uncomfortable because I know that, I'll get up tomorrow and have to do it, right? But like, I know this is kind of silly, but for perfectionists who are working on health and fitness, start with something unrelated to health and fitness and half-ass it, seriously, because it won't feel quite so prickly and difficult. What do you think about that?
It's great. It's like, the only way to get comfortable being uncomfortable is to practice being uncomfortable, right? And always start small. And especially when it comes to your health and fitness, to your point, start in other areas and just get comfortable with that feeling. Because our most successful clients, and I promise you will get there, all have become comfortable sticking with it while being less than perfect, right? Whereas chronic dieters, and that is no longer us, not on my watch at least, are only sticking with it when things are perfect, right? Things have to be perfect. And when they're not perfect, they quit. And it just becomes this vicious cycle, right? And the vicious cycle is, try to be perfect, fall short, because after all, we're only human, we're not robots, quit, and then go back to step one and repeat the process. That is what chronic dieters do. And that's why they're constantly on to the next thing. Right. One thing after another. As soon as it gets uncomfortable, and what that uncomfort or what that discomfort really is they're no longer able to be perfect, right? So they're perfect. Life happens. There's discomfort. They're out, right? So they quit. And then they're on to the next thing. Perfect. Quit as soon as they can't be perfect.
Yep. Critical component of consistency right here. Self-compassion.
Yep.
What's tactic 2?
So this is a little out there, not too out there, but there's been this whole kind of movement of architecture these days is so perfect, right? Everything is square. You go into like a chain, everything just looks like very cold. There's no character. There's no warmth. Everything's just like rectangles. Like, embrace imperfect architecture, because that's really what's most interesting, right? Like when
Hmm.
you look at things that are like beautiful, it's the interesting things. It's the things that are less than perfect. And just try to notice the imperfect things in your life and try to appreciate them.
Yeah.
Because I think, again, I think there's been this movement of like, what happened to all these like, you know, you don't see like curves in architecture anymore. You don't like it's just very rectangular, square, uniform, and there's this whole movement of people that miss that.
Hmm.
So just try to embrace it. Just try to embrace all the imperfection out there because imperfection truly is beautiful. And we might think our spouses or loved ones or whatever are perfect, but like no one wants a perfect person. You want it's their quirks and their interesting things about them that's what makes them who they are, right? We don't want a perfect person.
Right. I think there's in Japanese culture, wabi sabi. Have you heard of that?
No, I love a good rhyme though.
I'll let them know. Um, I believe this is right. I think it's Japanese culture, wabi sabi, and it's the idea that like the imperfections of something are what make it beautiful,
Yeah.
right? So like we had this dining table for years when my kids were little. Adam, I kid you not, like I found their names etched into the
Oh my
wood.
god.
There were like paints. Listen, one day I came out, they were eating dinner, and I'm like, oh, I see we decided to sign our names at the top of the table with a fork. Awesome. you know? And I read about wabi sabi a long time ago and I thought, oh, that's wabi sabi. Like,
Yep.
just leave it because that's beautiful. My small children
Yeah.
thought they'd leave their name. So wabi sabi, right? Like notice where can you wabi sabi something, right? And recognize that that's the beauty. That's life on this piece or, wherever you notice it. So wabi sabi.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents.
I love that. It reminds me of the
Cool.
story of, this parent was playing outside on the grass. The kids were messing the grass up. And, one of the parents says, "You're messing the grass up." And the person says, "I'm not raising grass, I'm raising kids." And
Mm,
it just reminds us that, like, a messed up house, an imperfect house, like, that is ultimately a happy home in terms of, it's not about that perfection, right? It's about the quirks and all that good stuff and the imperfections and the scratches. Like, we've all been to restaurants where, for example, everyone carves their name in the bathroom or on the wall. Like, those are the types of stuff you seek out, right? You're not going to
right.
seek out a perfectly, restaurant that looks like a hospital room that there's no character whatsoever, right? It's those
Yeah.
interesting things that's what we seek out. All right.
Okay.
Um, Next thing, I'm a big fan of mantras because we all have this wiring, this narrative of, at least us recovering perfectionists or perfectionists, that perfection is the way. And we have to challenge that inner voice. And mantras can help because instead of repeating, perfect, 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 essentially, we're repeating other things that help us move forward. So some of my favorite mantras are progress, not perfection, better than before, always something instead of all or nothing, always something instead of all or nothing. And those three things really help me because it just reminds me that always something is better than all or nothing. And whenever I'm tempted to be like, I don't have as much time as I want for a workout, or I can't eat exactly the way I want, something is always better than nothing, right? A short workout is better than the perfect one we don't do. A less than healthy meal or, a less than ideal meal in your mind is better than, just throwing it out the window and saying, I don't care.
Well, and this is where the consistency crops up, right? Like, it, what does that look like on paper? I think sometimes people struggle with like, well, what does it look like to be consistent, right? So let's give an example. And I will say your mantras, like over the years, given to clients, I see clients use them all the time. Guys, mantras seem like a silly thing. They're not.
Yeah.
Get it in your head and let it run on repeat because it really works. Here's an example of consistency when somebody gives themselves room for self compassion and room to be less than perfect, right? For example, I have a client, she's working really hard on her fitness. She came up with this beautiful weekly fitness plan. It included, walking almost daily. It included strength sessions of 20 to 30 minutes 3 times a week. It included 2 30-minute runs a week. Okay. In the meantime, life is, of course, happening. She's traveling, she's having visitors, she's getting sick, right? Like these things happen.
Yeah.
And she is a recovering perfectionist, recovering beautifully. And instead of burning her village to the ground, which is what I always tell her, don't burn the village to the ground. You're going to need to live there one day.
I like that.
She's embraced fewer steps, not 0 steps,
Right.
fewer steps in a day, 10 minutes on her mat instead of 0 on her strength work. You know, and the cool thing is like we track this in a spreadsheet for her because she likes to have a visual.
Yeah.
And we put green for days where she hit no 0. That whole spreadsheet is green. The whole thing. Because she never said, well, I couldn't do my 30-minute strength as planned because I was sick.
Yep.
So that would have been a red day. She has no red days.
Love that.
Not a single one. So that is consistency over time. And that's why we're trying to eliminate this perfectionism and achieve self-compassion. She has had to extend herself immense self-compassion on these days. It was really, really hard for her. She struggled a lot, Adam. Like,
Right.
and she still does, right? Like she's not awesome at it, but that's why we work together day in and day out. So
Yep.
I remind her, remember, our goal is self-compassion. It is not perfection. And
Yep.
her consistency is amazing.
That's amazing. And that's beautiful because that is where the magic is. Like for perfectionists or recovering perfectionists, that messy middle, that messy feeling of being less than perfect, that is the work, right? That is the work.
Mm-hmm.
And learning how to stick with it while feeling that and while being less than perfect and while conditions are less than ideal, that is where the magic happens. Because again, we know what's the alternative. We can't wait for things to be perfect. We can't wait for the coast to be clear. We can't wait for nothing to be on the horizon. There's always something on the horizon, right? And it's like, you know, similarly, it's like there's people who are like, well, I have a vacation coming up or something coming up. I'm just going to wait or I'm going to pause. But eventually you're going to have to work through that, right? So you might as well do it sooner than later. Otherwise, you're just kicking the can down the road.
Yep, absolutely. All right, did we cover everything?
I think so. You know, I think it's important to remember chronic dieters chase perfection, right? That is not us. We chase progress. We chase better than before. We chase something instead of all or nothing. We chase doing the least we can without doing nothing, right? And self-compassion is practicing skills, is practicing these skills. It's sticking with it while being less than perfect. It's taking care of yourself while being less than perfect. And perfectionism ultimately is quitting, right? You're quitting a lot. So perfectionism equals quitting a lot. Self-compassion equals practicing skills a lot. And the more self-compassion you have, the more you'll practice and the more successful you'll be. Whereas if you continue down the path of perfectionism, we know where that's going to lead.
Yep, absolutely. All right, gang, thanks for tuning in. We hope you'll take some of this to heart. Get out there, practice half-assing things, notice the wabi-sabis, and try on those mantras, and just see how consistent you can become. Until next time, take good care.